That's the stories from the Talmud. There was a great door into the temple, a great metal door. It's a pair of doors. And they were closed at night. It took a lot of people to push on this big, tall, heavy bronze door to get it to swing open and again to swing closed. I guess they were well hinged. Well, from the time of 30 AD onward, and the sources vary a little bit on this, but the doors would just open up at night. They would find them open. And they would have to push them back. They opened of their own accord. And the understanding of this apparently was that the city, the temple, was giving itself up to its enemies, and also that there was no barrier to the Holy of Holies inside the temple anymore. It was seen as a bad sign. The black rock and the white rock were seen as a bad sign. The failure of the cord around the goat's neck, excuse me, it was also seen as a bad sign. The doors opening, obviously a strange sign, a bad sign. But here's another one. Their menorah had 7 candles on it, the great menorah in the temple. And although I've only recently learned this, apparently they weren't all lit all the time. The 4 that were kind of in the center, like 1 remained lit on the west, of all the branches, and 2 remained lit on the east. But the 4 in the middle, they would be relit each day from the fire on the west. The fire on the west was kind of like the perennial fire. They were all supplied with their own oil lines. But at any rate, when they put out the ones they wished to put out each day, they would just relight them from the one on the furthest west. Well, starting in 30 AD, the one on the west went out. It would go out each day. And what these writings say is that every day it went out. They tried for a while to cure this problem, to find out what was going on, but they never did figure it out. It had to be relit for 40 years leading up until their destruction in 70 AD. It had to be relit, totally. So these signs are odd signs. All of the Jewish people apparently knew about them. They apparently knew the date at which things had started to go wrong. They could trace back and say, yeah, it was right here. And for whatever reason, there was no general acknowledgement that it might have been Jesus, that Jesus might have been the Messiah that he claimed to be. There seems to be no record of an understanding that apparently marked the point of their bad luck, and the 40 years passed. They saw more signs that were strange leading up to 70 AD, which I've read about from Josephus's writings. There was a time close to the end where they saw in clouds in Jerusalem scenes, sort of like we would see television, of battle. Like there was a bank of clouds, and one day people in the city were called to go out and look outside because of this strange thing happening. And in the sunset clouds there were armies battling. There were apparently chariots, soldiers, battles going on. Battle scenes in the sky. And pretty soon there was going to be a big battle in Jerusalem when the Romans destroyed it, right? Well, and then it's noted that at a certain night on a certain religious holiday, there were priests in the temple, and they heard the sound of a really large, excited, frightened crowd saying, "Get in here," close to some large tower that they had within the city. And I guess it was heard by plenty of witnesses, enough so that they recorded the event. And it sounded like they were, a terrified crowd hiding from somebody. Well, only a few years later, the last of the people inside of Jerusalem, when the Romans came charging in through the wall they finally broke, they did hide in that very place, a large crowd of them, but they were killed there. There's also an odd story of close to the last year, so this probably would have been 66 AD. There was one of their annual feasts, and a man came with his relatives. Large crowds gathered in Jerusalem, people from all over Israel gathered there. And he was suddenly struck as if he had received a vision. And he just kept saying, "Woe is Jerusalem! Woe, woe is Jerusalem!" There wasn't anything bad going on right then. So his family thought it was really interesting at first because apparently he'd received a vision, But it wasn't very exciting to hear about because he just kept saying, "Woe is Jerusalem! Woe, woe is Jerusalem!" And pretty soon was time for them to leave, and he was still saying this, still acting like this, just sad and saying these words. They left him behind, and he just wandered around in Jerusalem, and he just kept saying that. And people thought it was very interesting at first, and they would come and listen to him, but he never said anything more or further. So pretty soon it was just annoying. And then it got to the point where they were thinking he was real tiresome because he yelled it out pretty long, pretty loud. And after a while, times and events happened to bring about the siege of Jerusalem. The Romans came, they encircled the city. The people inside were afraid. They were trying to, maintain confidence inside the city walls as Rome attacked. The war was going on. It wasn't going so good a lot of the times. And this guy was walking around, had been for a long time. Woe is Jerusalem, woe is Jerusalem. Well, they couldn't get him to quit. He became sort of a problem. And they had even had him whipped at a certain point when the Romans were still in charge and they weren't at war. And they had, they weren't allowed to do corporal punishment, so they had to go to the Romans. And the Romans whipped him until bones showed. But they just, they couldn't get him to quit. And all he would do is just look at him, not even mad at him, just sad for the whole situation, So the Romans just said he's a madman. Well, now the Romans, it's a later time, the Romans are surrounding the city, and the man's still saying it, and it's, ruining morale. And then one day, he changes his tune. Woe, woe is Jerusalem, and woe is me. And over the fence, over the gates of the city, over the walls of the city, comes one of the siege stones that the Romans threw, and it hit him and killed him. So, these are the sorts of signs that were seen coming up into the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD. But perhaps the strangest one of all was before the Romans encircled the city, but close to that time, maybe in the 60s AD, a cow was being led up to be sacrificed at one of the holy feasts of Israel, and it stopped, hunched its back, and gave birth to a sheep. That's a recorded event, a recorded happening during the 40-year period between when Christ died and Jerusalem was destroyed. These things are pretty interesting, but yet most Christians have never heard them. I would encourage anybody to look into them. We live in the age of Google. Google, I shouldn't say Google, but searchable internet, and I think that anybody can easily find these stories, these accounts outside of my having spoken of them, and you can read them in more detail and see that there's a lot that isn't told that would be very, I think, convincing to some people. I'm Dan Curry from the Deeds of God website. Thank you for listening.